A shocking defeat for the mayor's coalition. His proposal to expand the convention center fails to qualify for the ballot. A heightened risk of deportation. The warning for students and staff at local college campuses. And a matter of public safety becomes political as President Trump questions the response to California's wildfires. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Lori Weisberg, who covers tourism and hospitality for the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS education reporter Megan Burks, reporter Jade Heineman of KPBS News, and Matt Hall, editorial and opinion page editor for the Union-Tribune. Well, we won't be talking about whether enough San Diego voters in November will support Mayor Faulkner's proposal to expand the convention center. The proposal, backed by a broad coalition of civic leaders, failed to even reach the ballot. The drive to raise hotel taxes to pay for the expansion, relief for the homeless, and badly needed street repairs failed utterly. Lori, this was a stunner. Give us the nuts and bolts. What happened this week?
Well, it seems like it's been a month ago, but so much has happened, as you say, in a week. So what led to this meeting was the fact that this initiative, the backers of it turned in more than 114,000 signatures. They needed more than 71,000 valid signatures. They failed a random count. And when you fail a random count, that triggers a full verification, but that takes 30 days. And Friday, August 10th, was the deadline for putting anything on the ballot.
And just to do a little housekeeping here, remind us exactly what the proposal did call for.
So the proposal, both the initiative and what the council considered on Thursday, was it was going to raise the hotel tax by anywhere from 1.25 percentage points to 3.25 percentage points.
And again, this is all on visitors.
This is all on visitors.
Not local folks paying this tax.
So depending on where the hotels were. And all that revenue was going to go to an expanded convention center, a steady stream of funding for the homeless, housing programs, and road repairs. The biggest bulk was convention center funding, but still maybe about $1.8 billion over the lifetime of this 42-year measure.
Yeah, and over time, it was going to generate billions for these
Right. So and everybody expected it to make the ballot because this was a pretty hefty coalition behind it, business, labor, some homeless advocates. They spent more than $1 million on this. And it, as I said, did not qualify. And
once the petition number failed, and that look at it failed, and they didn't have enough valid petitions, they went to the council with kind of a Hail Mary, right, yesterday?
Yeah, and the mayor, this has been a priority from the mayor since he took office, and so he went. They noticed the meeting 24 hours in advance, which was okay to do, and they called the special council meeting to consider just placing a ballot measure very similar to the initiative on the ballot. But in doing so, that required making exemption to their policies that require multiple hearings and more vetting of this measure. So we asked them to do that. And the council, before they even got to putting it on the ballot, said they split on a 4-4 vote, would not make an exception to those policies, and it's dead.
And open government advocates like former Councilwoman Donna Fry said this was a good thing. The public didn't have anywhere near enough time to see what they were trying to do here.
Right.
Matt, a big fail here for political leadership. I mean, it wasn't just Mayor Faulkner. We've said it's his signature issue, been pushing for it for a long time, but there was a lot of folks involved in this.
This is a who's who, a murderer's row of the political establishment in San Diego. You have the Chamber of Commerce and the San Diego Downtown Partnership, the Downtown San Diego Partnership. You have major labor leaders. I mean, one of them went so far yesterday as to characterize this as something that rhymes with hit show.
Okay. Family show, thank you.
And so, but this, let's not mince words here, this is a big blunder by Mayor Kevin Faulkner. He's the guy where the buck stops. He said at his State of the City in January that this measure is going to be the most important decision in front of voters come November, that he would work tirelessly to get it passed. Now that just seems like a tired line. You know what I mean? A lot of people, including the editorial board, have given that mayor some credit for navigating some difficult situations, but these failures are starting to add up. You know what I mean? Only starting with pension reform, which is a whole other issue, but he was involved in pushing that forward, and that got blocked. So now we're left with just not knowing what's going to happen. I will say one small interesting note that's getting lost in this conversation is that there is still a 30-day window to verify these signatures, and they could eke by, which would make it live for 2020 and keep it alive.
I think there's a point to be made on that, and it's something I'm going to be addressing in my coverage. But so one of the things that Mayor Faulkner needed to clear the decks on before this initiative, and he did clear the decks on, was to get an agreement with developers waiting in the wings that have control of the site.
Yeah.
And so they were going to get a $33 million payout to stand down and not build. That agreement now falls apart. Are they going to wait till 2020? I doubt it. They have a leasehold. They have a $300 million project. They've done an environmental impact report. They want their hearing before the port, I'm presuming, and they're not. I don't think they're going to wait till 2020. So that begs the question. I think some were looking to maybe it'll qualify in this 2020, but now I don't know.
What do you
Megan?
think went wrong? I mean, the group behind this petition is threatening litigation against the signature gatherers, right? So was it the signature gathering, or was it just that they failed to really make that pitch to San Diegans, and so city council members didn't really feel like they needed to push it through?
I think some have, so you're right about this lawsuit, but is that really what happened? I heard from early on that maybe from some that maybe they were misled on how long this would take. They underestimated the amount of money they'd have to spend right out the gate, and starting signatures in January, that they took too long, and by the time it got closer, they were really having to play catch up. I don't know if we'll ever know the truth, and let's see if that lawsuit gets filed.
Got caught flat-footed. Now, we did mention the 4 city council members opposed. We have kind of a collage of comments from them. Let's hear what their reasons were.
If we make an exception today, we lose the trust of our residents.
We are putting the real needs of San Diegans under the needs of those who have power, who have money, and who have self-interest.
I can't support waiving the policies that really structure the way that we govern. I am a strong believer that transparency and good governance matter.
I also support the convention center expansion. However, I have concerns given that there has not been ample time for public review and input. So I will not be supporting a waiver of the council policy.
All right, and just for the record, that was Council Members Bree, Alvarez, Gomez, and Cole, and in order there. And again, a lot of them still support the project overall, but it was this whole transparency issue that they were talking about.
Yeah, and afterwards, when I was talking to Councilwoman Bree, she seemed to be really taking it hard, and she said she wanted to point out that unlike maybe some of her colleagues, I think she meant Alvarez, I really do support this convention center. So I think they felt like really in a bind, but they couldn't do it.
But as you say, and I know you'll be doing stories and editorials on it in the coming days and weeks, but if there's a building there right in the middle where they wanted to put that expansion down on the waterfront, that kind of shoots it away, doesn't it?
That's a huge issue, and one of the things Lori touched on, it points to Faulkner and City Hall's kind of mismanagement of this whole thing. Not only were they on the hook for $33 million if it went through, if it doesn't go through, they're on the hook for $5 million. That's just like monopoly money that they just gave away. They burned $5 million and of taxpayers' money. Now,
Mayor Faulkner is not going to run again. He's termed out, right?
He's termed out. And what's interesting is that you're looking at the cards for 2020. Barbara Bree is someone whose name is mentioned as a mayoral candidate, and her vote. What they had was a balancing act yesterday. They had to decide whether they wanted to push forward on a convention center or kind of hold to this good government line. No knock on that line. I'm a full believer in public involvement, but Barbara has some explaining to do. That's a tough vote that who knows if it comes back to haunt her or not.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly see as that goes. Before we leave this segment, I should point out KPBS and others at the time, they had done an environmental impact report on that expansion down there on the waterfront. And based on studies done right here in San Diego, climate change could affect that. It could be underwater within the lifetime of that building, and that isn't even kind of mentioned in the whole thing. It's really quite a contentious issue. We'll see where it goes from here. Well, we are going to move on. Fallout continues from Donald Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy. A federal judge in San Diego ruled again this week on the policy that separated kids from parents. And there's new reporting on how foreign students here legally on visas may get caught up in Trump's overall immigration crackdown. And let's start right there. Megan, what are university officials telling us, important students heading into the fall?
Basically, stay on top of your visa under these new policies that went into effect this week. If somebody mistakenly overstays their visa or for some reason their visa lapses, they are subject to much stiffer penalties, including possibly a 5 or 10-year ban or even a permanent ban on returning to the United States.
So it seemed like maybe a clerical thing and it wasn't a big deal in the past. What's been the situation till now?
Right. For the past 20 years, if you were, say, an international student and maybe you got sick and so you had to drop classes and you didn't have enough units to be eligible to stay in the United States, you would apply to be reinstated, and the government would typically say, yeah, no problem, keep up with your studies. And now under this policy change, what happens is the moment your visa lapses, you start accruing unlawful presence, which is basically just racking up time in the United States without permission. And the more time you rack up, the stiffer the penalties. And so the problem also now is that it used to be that you didn't start accruing unlawful presence until the government had reviewed maybe your reinstatement application or your appeal and said, yeah, we don't want you to stay. Now you're starting to accrue unlawful presence. Now it starts at day one, and then you're stuck waiting for a decision. And 3-4 months down the line, instead of the government saying, please leave the United States as soon as you can, they're saying, we're not going to accept your appeal. You've been accruing unlawful presence for 4 months now. Here's a notice to appear in court. We're going to start your deportation proceedings. And also under the policy, this is made all the more likely because the Trump administration has told adjudicators, the people who are looking at these applications, that they now have more discretion to just turn applicants down outright. So say you're a faculty member and you are applying for an extension. If you forget to attach your diploma, or commonly you're having to argue, I'm an outstanding researcher in this field, please keep me. Now an adjudicator can just say, I don't think you're that great, you should leave the country, or sorry, you didn't attach your diploma, you should leave the country. Before, they would have said, we need you to submit more evidence, or we need you to submit this diploma. So there was kind of an appeal process built in, and now it's possible that appeal process is gone, and then that with these harsher penalties means that people really need to stay on top of their applications. And
give it a little bit idea of the scope of this. How often does this happen to students who are here legally, except for this, as you explained it?
Well, so just kind of setting the scene, UC San Diego alone has 8,500 international students and I think 2,700 international faculty members. The Department of Justice just came out with numbers showing that it's really only about 1% of people on visas who don't leave the country when they're supposed to. 1% sounds small, but that's hundreds of thousands of people, and it's a bit more likely if you have the kind of visa that's more typical in an academic setting. So those people overstay their visas 2 to 3%. And so some people might look at those numbers and say, well, maybe these academic visitors think they're too good for our immigration laws. But in talking with university administrators, it seems like there is much more of a chance for something to happen, for you to get sick or for something to happen in your family because you're here for an extended period of time. This is not just a tourist visa.
All right, well, we'll see what happens with that going forward and how that plays out politically and of course, locally. I did want to shift now to the ongoing zero tolerance mess. Jade, how many kids are still separated from their parents? Who came here, the parents who came here seeking asylum, we should point out, from violence?
Well, so there were about 2,500. According to the latest status report, there's about 559 children still left behind. Just last week, Judge Dana Sabra was really critical of the Trump administration for not having a plan in place to get the parents who had already been deported back stateside and reunited with their children. So now they're working on a plan to do that. They've put a group of agencies together to sort of work that out.
And notably, yesterday there was an incident where a judge was rather upset and turned a plane around, right? Exactly.
So, they've had these status hearings. The judges have said that they are going to pause the deportations. And then yesterday, we find out that they've deported a mother and child back to El Salvador. That judge found out, was very upset, turned that plane around after it had landed. Luckily, they hadn't gotten off the plane yet, and they bought the plane back. But he threatened to hold sessions in contempt contempt if they were not able to be returned.
Now, what is the government saying about the efforts to reunite these families?
Well, you know, they have not said much about the efforts. Again, they've put a team of agencies in place to sort of work on that. But just as of last week, they didn't have a plan in place. That's why the judges have been so critical and very concerned that these 500 or so children that have been left behind could be permanently orphaned because there hasn't been a plan in place to reunify them with parents who have already been deported.
Lori?
Do you get the sense, I mean, this drama has been playing out for a while, and initially when we saw the optics of these children being separated from the parents, it was very powerful. Do you think as time drags on, the public still cares about this? Obviously, the judicial system does, and the judges do. Are people still outraged? Do you get that sense? Can you tell? Is Trump taking any blame for this anymore? Or?
You know, I think that people are still outraged over it. I will say, though, that in kind of watching the pattern of the administration before this started to transpire, you'll remember that there were comments from the White House calling people animals, rapists, things like that. So there was definitely an effort in place to dehumanize people who may be arriving at that border seeking asylum. So I think there was definitely an effort to sort of dehumanize people so that this could go through and be more palatable to the American public. If it is, that's up to people to decide.
Yeah, there's nothing palatable about this. Let's be honest. This is something you're going to read about in history books down the road. This is the American government taking kids away from families. It's horrendous.
And how does it play out in these coming critical midterm elections across the country? I
mean, that's a good question. Republicans are standing by Trump. So that's a question of
the immigration crackdown.
I mean, look, there's a discussion to be had between Democrats and Republicans about border security versus immigration policy. Trump's winning that with his base, so the question in November will be turnout, as it often is.
Let's see how this one plays. The Judge Sabraw did have a ruling this week in San Diego regarding this zero tolerance policy. What was that?
Right, so he's extended that pause on deportations. He's still not made an official ruling in this. He's weighing out the issues with the immigration process, because since these families had been separated, they're at different places in the immigration process. You know, a child may be up for a credible fear interview, and a parent may have already failed that process and been eligible for deportation. So they're really just trying to, once they unify these families, figure out how they can have them go through the immigration process together and make decisions on whether to continue with seeking asylum or not.
Okay, so that's all yet to come. And then again, as you say, we still have several hundred who have not been reunited, and we'll be following the news on that.
Exactly.
Okay, great. We're going to move on then. From San Diego to the Oregon border, Californians have seen horrific wildfires in recent years, but right now it's worse than ever. Twin fires called the Mendocino Complex merged this week after building in intensity since July. Nearly 1,000 acres in Northern California have been consumed. Hundreds of structures are lost. Tens of thousands have fled their homes. It's officially the largest fire in California history, yet a dozen more are burning elsewhere in the state, including a big Orange County fire. And we've had another fire here in San Diego County that's been contained. The Carr fire near Redding has claimed 8 lives, and we're not even into traditional fall fire season when its deadly Santa Ana winds here in the south start blowing. Matt, how taxing has this been for firefighters in the state?
This is unbelievable. I was talking to my coworkers today who has a friend on the fire lines who met a firefighter from Australia. This is a worldwide crisis. I mean,
yeah, NPR had an interview this morning with a firefighter from Australia.
I mean, I think it's 14,000 firefighters battling these blazes. This is, I don't know if this is the new normal, but it's pretty close. You know, we've had, San Diego knows terrible fires. You know, we've had 2003, 2007, unbelievable fires raging through the heart of the city. And you're starting to see these fires, these wildfires start for a variety of reasons. You know, but something needs to change to prevent this.
Let's talk a bit about some of the other notable fires now. Part of Yosemite National Park is like a ghost town in the middle of a tourist season.
Yeah, and that's difficult too. I mean, that's one of the more popular destinations in California, and there are, you know, it's being closed off to the public. I mean, a lot of these fires are in kind of backcountry places that are tough to get to, tough to defend, which is why you hear these stories of them jumping rivers and freeways and tough to control. You know, the firefighters are out there doing amazing work, but I think they're kind of under the gun on this.
Yeah. Lake Tahoe's been filled with smoke. People are canceling vacations. Sacramento, of course, the state capital, you got smoke up there, even though the fires are, relatively a long way away. It just shows you the size of them.
And as you say, this is early in the season. I mean, is there even a season anymore? This is like a year-round thing. We were all talking about the Thomas Fire in winter last year, which was then the wildest wildfire in state history, and now, it's not even mid-August yet, and we're under the gun like this.
Right, Lori?
And you alluded to, there's multiple reasons, and much emphasis has been placed on climate change. It's led to these parched conditions, and this extended heat waves that we have. But and you mentioned though the rural areas. Don't we have some blame in this? We continue. I remember covering this years ago. This idea that we keep moving further and further into the backcountry. We want that country living. Don't we bear some responsibility for
the urban wildland interface?
To keep moving beyond the urban core into these areas that are much more vulnerable.
There's no question. But look, California has a housing crisis. It's a balancing act between where you build new homes and how you protect the public. You see this in the North County, where people are talking about building massive developments, and some of the NIMBYism arguments that are made, I think the most legitimate ones are about fire safety.
Let's talk a little bit about what happened this week. Governor Jerry Brown had requested for National Disaster Area Declaration, which gets folks funds that affects insurance and grants and various things. And that was granted by President Trump, but then he startled everybody by some tweets that he made. What happened there?
What a shocker. Trump startling someone with a tweet or two. Yeah, he basically, you can discuss, I think, whether Trump should be here or not. That's kind of a question. Some partisans may say that he should have come to the area quicker. Some may say he shouldn't because they're still fighting this and it's not time yet. But when he tweets that this has as much to do with water policy as anything, he doesn't even talk about climate change, to your point. But he's basically talking about issues that have kind of no bearing on this. I mean, you mentioned the Mendocino complex fire. That is literally horseshoed around a huge lake. There's water there to fight that. Water policy isn't an issue. What is an issue, and this is the ultimate irony, and he could address this himself, is that there are 33 million acres of forests in California. The federal government has control of 57%, manages 57%. That's 19 million acres. One good policy question is whether the federal government should get in there and start thinning some of these fires so that we don't have this dry tinder.
So more money for underbrush mitigation, maybe more money for fire resources, for firefighting efforts. This is costing the state a fortune here with the increase in fires and frequency.
Yeah.
Now, he really was. They asked, reporters were asking, and people were scratching their heads from here to Washington, trying to figure out what he was even saying in these tweets. I mean, he made the startling revelation here that apparently Governor Brown can keep rivers from running to the ocean somehow. Yeah. Rivers run to the sea.
Sure.
And as you say, the fire officials here say water isn't a problem in fighting these fires.
A CAL FIRE chief said, water is not an issue. This is not a question of water. So that was completely off base. And like I said, it's a discussion whether he should be here or not. But that's one concrete policy item that he could be talking about. And it's a kind of Republican issue because a lot of environmentalists don't want to thin forests for some reasons. But it seems like that's a pretty easy approach to undertake, and it's well within his jurisdiction.
Kind of bring it up, but it almost felt more like he was talking about, well, let's bring loggers in there, and that's not. You need to.
Right, it's a nuanced issue between environmentalists and concern for logging some of the areas, and with legitimate underbrush and forest management.
Right, and the forest management would be going after those thinner trees that can't really withstand the flames, and that's not something that loggers would be interested in.
And you had
touch on it, but in his way.
You had Commerce, and he wasn't backing down because he had his Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross. He kind of gave away the game Thursday, was conflating the wildfire battles with endangered species and protecting waterways. And this gets into a whole other complicated issue. Water's nothing if not complicated in California, we've said many times, but it's talking about some of the interests in the Central Valley, agricultural interests, and how much water is diverted to protect some certain species, et cetera. But again, has nothing to do with fighting fires.
This is a complex issue. We shouldn't be having Twitter conversation. I love Twitter. I'm on it all the time. This is not a conversation for Twitter.
Right. So with regard to the federal government, is there any push to put some money into mitigating fires in the West? And it's not just here. There's many fires around the country, places in Florida and states in the East that normally don't see wildfires.
Yeah. I think you're going to see in these upcoming budgets cycles, both at the state and at the federal level, that very question be tackled. There's a lot of competing issues. This is a super complex question. So the question of resources and where you devote those, that has to be front and center in our budgeting discussions.
We got a few seconds left. I wanted to say it looks like the rest of the experts are saying the worst may be yet to come throughout California and Southern California too.
It's a safe bet.
Yeah, because we got the Santa Ana's coming, and that's the traditional fire season, but as we say, it extends to the whole year now, unfortunately. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed and see what happens going forward. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guests, Lori Weisberg of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Megan Burks of KPBS News, Jade Heinman of KPBS, and Matt Hall of the Union-Tribune. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website. That's kpbs.org. And thanks for joining us today, and be sure to join us again next week on the Roundtable.